The mining ship Harmony's Dream shook violently as it fell through the red clouds of Piraxis Prime. Captain Park Ji-ho gripped his chair and shouted orders to his crew, but the engines were dead. The ship had been traveling to collect rare minerals when something went wrong with the navigation system. "Brace for impact," Ji-ho yelled as the ground rushed toward them. The crash was terrible. Metal twisted and screamed. Fire burst from broken fuel lines. The ship carved a deep scar across the rocky volcanic surface before finally coming to rest against a massive boulder. Smoke rose from the wreckage into the orange sky. Hours passed. The only sounds were the wind and the distant rumble of active volcanoes. Then something moved near the twisted metal. A small boy crawled out from under a piece of debris. He was only 3 years old, with dirt on his face and tears in his clothes. His name was Dae-ho, and he was the only survivor of the crash. The little boy stood on shaky legs and looked around at the strange red landscape. He called for his parents, but no one answered. Dae-ho wandered away from the smoking wreckage. He was scared and hungry. The air was thick and warm, filled with the smell of sulfur. Strange rock formations jutted up from the ground like giant teeth. In the distance, mountains glowed with rivers of lava flowing down their sides. The boy walked for what felt like hours. His small legs were tired, and he stumbled often on the rough ground. Just when he thought he could not go any further, he heard a sound that made him freeze with fear. A deep rumbling roar echoed across the rocky plains. Dae-ho turned and saw something that should have been impossible. A creature the size of a small building was walking toward him. It moved on 4 powerful legs, each one as thick as a tree trunk. Its body was covered in scales that looked like pieces of burning metal. The creature's head was long and dragon-like, with glowing yellow eyes and sharp teeth. Most frightening of all, smoke was coming from its nostrils. The creature was an Ignis, though young Dae-ho did not know this name yet. The Ignis were an ancient race that had lived on Piraxis Prime for thousands of years. They were intelligent beings with their own language, culture, and laws. This particular Ignis was named Velnara, and she was very old and very wise. Velnara had heard the crash and come to investigate. She had never seen a human before and was curious about this small, strange creature walking alone across the dangerous landscape. Dae-ho tried to run, but his tired legs gave out. He fell to his knees and began to cry. The massive Ignis approached slowly, her great head lowering to get a better look at the tiny being. Something unexpected happened then. As Velnara looked into the child's frightened but determined eyes, she felt a stirring in her ancient heart. This small creature was alone and helpless, just as her own children had been long ago before they grew strong. Though he was not of her kind, she could see his brave spirit. Velnara made a sound deep in her throat like a gentle purr mixed with distant thunder. She carefully extended one massive claw and gently touched the boy's shoulder. Her touch was surprisingly warm but not burning hot. Dae-ho stopped crying and looked up at the enormous creature. Something in her glowing eyes seemed kind, even motherly. He was still afraid, but he sensed that this beast would not hurt him. The ancient Ignis carefully scooped up the small human in her massive claws and began walking toward the mountains. She moved with surprising gentleness, making sure not to jostle or frighten the child more than necessary. They traveled for several hours across the volcanic landscape. Dae-ho saw amazing sights that no human had ever witnessed before. Great geysers of superheated steam shot up from cracks in the ground. Lakes of bubbling lava glowed like giant campfires. Strange rock formations twisted into impossible shapes, carved by thousands of years of volcanic activity. Finally, they reached the base of a massive mountain. Velnara approached what looked like a solid rock wall, but as they got closer, Dae-ho could see it was actually the entrance to an enormous cave. The opening was big enough for several Ignis to walk through side by side. Inside the cave, Dae-ho gasped in wonder. The cavern was huge beyond imagination, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. The walls were smooth and carved with intricate patterns. Glowing crystals provided light throughout the space. Most amazing of all, the cave was filled with more of the dragon-like creatures. There were dozens of Ignis of all sizes. Some were as large as Velnara, while others were smaller. A few were clearly young ones, no bigger than horses. They all turned to look as Velnara entered, carrying her strange burden. The Ignis began making sounds to each other in their own language. It was like listening to controlled thunder mixed with the roar of distant waterfalls. Some sounded curious, others seemed concerned or even angry. One particularly large Ignis approached them. His scales were darker than the others, almost black with red edges. His eyes glowed brighter, and when he opened his mouth, small flames flickered between his teeth. This was Torkan, the leader of the Flameheart clan. Torkan spoke to Velnara in their rumbling language. Even though Deho could not understand the words, he could tell from the tone that Torkan was not happy about bringing a strange creature into their home. But Velnara stood her ground. She replied in firm tones, holding the small human protectively. The two adult Ignis had what appeared to be an argument, with other clan members joining in the discussion. Finally, Velnara made a decisive gesture and carried Deho deeper into the cavern. She brought him to a smaller chamber that seemed to be her personal space. The walls were decorated with carved symbols, and the floor was covered with smooth stones that retained heat from the volcanic activity below. Velnara gently set Deho down and brought him water in a bowl carved from black volcanic glass. The water tasted strange but good, with a slightly mineral flavor. She also brought him some kind of food that looked like fruit, but glowed faintly from within. When Deho bit into it, he found it was sweet and filling, giving him energy he desperately needed. As night fell, the young human curled up on the warm stones. Velnara settled nearby, her massive form creating a protective barrier around the small sleeping area. Her body radiated gentle heat, keeping the child warm and comfortable. For the first time since the crash, Deho felt safe. He did not understand what had happened to him or where he was, but somehow he knew that the great creature watching over him meant him no harm. As he drifted off to sleep, Velnara spoke softly in her own language. If Deho could have understood, he would have heard her giving him a new name in the ancient tongue of the Ignis. She called him Fireborn, for he had come to them from flames and destruction, yet he had survived. The old Ignis believed this was a sign that the small human was meant for great things. The first day of Deho's new life among the fire-breathing beasts had begun. 15 years had passed since the day Velnara found the small human child on the volcanic plains. Deho was now 18 years old, and no longer the scared little boy who had crawled from the wreckage of Harmony's dream. He had grown tall and strong, his body shaped by years of living among the Ignis. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds deep within the Flameheart caverns. Deho stood in the center of a large circular area, carved from smooth volcanic rock. His dark hair was tied back, and sweat gleamed on his skin as he moved through the ancient combat forms that Velnara had taught him. Unlike his Ignis family, Deho could not breathe fire or have scales as tough as metal, but he had developed other abilities that amazed his teachers. He was faster than any Ignis, able to move and dodge with incredible speed. His human mind worked differently too, seeing patterns and strategies that even the wisest Ignis warriors missed. Again, rumbled Torkan from the edge of the training area. The old Ignis leader had grown to respect the human boy over the years, though he still pushed him harder than any other student. Deho nodded and began the sequence again. He spun and kicked at imaginary enemies, his movements flowing like water but striking with the power of lightning. Each motion was perfect, learned through years of daily practice. A familiar sound made him pause. Heavy footsteps approached, and Deho smiled as he recognized the rhythm. Only one Ignis moved with that particular gait. Still training, brother? Came a deep, friendly voice. Deho turned to see Flamewing approaching. The young Ignis was about Deho's age in human years, though much larger in size. His scales were a brilliant orange-red color that seemed to glow in the cavern light. Small puffs of steam came from his nostrils when he spoke, a sign of excitement. Always training, Deho replied with a grin. Velnara says the body forgets what the mind does not practice. Flamewing chuckled, a sound like rocks tumbling in a gentle landslide. The old mother is wise. But today we have bigger concerns than practice fights. What do you mean? Before Flamewing could answer, Torkan stepped forward. The clan leader's expression was serious, more so than usual. Young Fireborn, Torkan said, using Deho's Ignis name. The time has come for your trial of burning skies. Deho felt his heart skip. Every young Ignis had to complete this trial to be accepted as a full adult warrior. He had been waiting for this moment for years, but had wondered if he would be allowed to attempt it since he was not truly Ignis. Both of you will face the trial together, Torkan continued, looking at Flamewing as well. You must climb Mount Infernus during the next great eruption and retrieve a piece of star metal from the crater rim. Only then will you be considered true warriors of the Flameheart clan. Mount Infernus was the largest volcano on Paraxis Prime, a massive peak that towered above all others. When it erupted, the entire mountain became a death trap of flowing lava, falling rocks, and poisonous gases. Many young Ignis had died attempting the trial over the centuries. When does the mountain next wake? Deho asked. In 3 days, Torkan replied. Prepare yourselves well. The next 3 days passed quickly. Deho spent hours with Velnara, learning special breathing techniques that would help him survive the toxic fumes near the crater. She also taught him how to read the patterns of lava flows and recognize the safest paths up the mountain. Remember, Fireborn, the old Ignis said on the night before the trial, you cannot breathe fire like us, but you have something we do not. Your spirit burns differently, but no less bright. Trust in your gifts. When the day came, Mount Infernus began its spectacular eruption just after dawn. The mountain shook the ground for miles around as massive jets of lava shot into the sky. Rivers of molten rock poured down the slopes like glowing waterfalls. Deho and Flamewing stood at the base of the mountain, looking up at the terrifying sight. Other young Ignis from different clans were also present, all preparing for their own trials. Ready, brother? Flamewing asked. Ready, Deho replied. They began their climb. The mountain was like a living thing, constantly shifting and changing as new lava flows carved different paths. The heat was incredible, even for beings used to the warmth of Paraxis Prime. Deho's special breathing techniques helped, but he still had to stop frequently to rest. Flamewing stayed close, using his larger size to shield Deho from the worst of the heat and falling debris. The young Ignis could have climbed much faster alone, but he never left his human brother's side. As they climbed higher, they began to pass other trial takers who had given up or been forced back by the dangerous conditions. The mountain was winning against most of them. Halfway up the slope, they encountered something unexpected. A figure in a strange silver suit was crouched behind a boulder, studying some kind of device in his hands. The figure looked up as they approached, and Deho gasped in shock. It was another human. The man appeared to be in his 30s with short brown hair and tired eyes. He wore advanced equipment that Deho had never seen before. When the stranger saw Deho, his expression changed to one of complete amazement. Impossible, the man whispered. A human, here. You are like me, Deho said in the human language, words feeling strange on his tongue after so many years of speaking only Ignis. My name is Sukjin, the man said, standing slowly. I'm a scout for the Galactic Federation. I've been searching this planet for survivors of the Harmony's dream crash. I never imagined I would find someone alive after all these years. Flamewing stepped closer, suspicious of this stranger. Small flames flickered around his teeth as he spoke in the Ignis language. Who is this one, brother? He smells of stars and metal. A survivor from my birth people, Deho explained, then turned back to Sukjin. What is this Galactic Federation? Sukjin began to explain about the great alliance of worlds and species that existed beyond Paraxis Prime. He told Deho about human civilization, about technologies and wonders the young man had never imagined. But before he could finish, the ground shook violently. This was not the normal shaking of the volcanic eruption. Something else was causing the mountain to tremble. From the sky came a sound like screaming metal mixed with insect buzzing. Dark shapes descended through the smoke and ash, moving too fast and in patterns too organized to be natural creatures. Shadow swarm, Sukjin said, his face going pale with fear. They found me. The dark shapes resolved into horrible insect-like creatures the size of aircraft. Their bodies were black and shiny, with too many legs and wings that beat too fast. Worst of all, where they landed on the volcanic rock, the stone began to turn gray and crumble. What are they? Deho asked. Devourers, Sukjin replied, checking his equipment frantically. They consume entire worlds. They must have followed my ship's trail. One of the creatures landed near them and opened what might have been a mouth. Inside was nothing but swirling darkness that seemed to pull at everything around it. The creature made a sound that hurt to hear. Flamewing reacted instantly. He reared up on his hind legs and breathed a stream of superheated plasma at the creature. The flame struck the beast directly, but instead of burning it, the fire simply disappeared into its dark body. Fire does not work, Flamewing said, shocked. More creatures were landing around them. Daeho's mind raced, drawing on years of tactical training. These beasts absorbed energy attacks, but what about physical force? "Flamewing, follow my lead!" Daeho shouted. Instead of attacking the creatures directly, Daeho grabbed a loose boulder and hurled it with all his strength. The rock struck one of the shadow swarm beasts and sent it tumbling down the mountain slope. The creature's dark body could absorb fire and energy, but it was still solid enough to be knocked around. "Use the mountain against them," Daeho yelled to Flamewing. Not fire, but rock and stone. Working together, the two friends began using their environment as a weapon. Flamewing's strength allowed him to move massive boulders, while Daeho's speed and tactical thinking helped him find the best angles of attack. Sukjin watched in amazement as the human raised by aliens and his Ignis companion fought off creatures that had defeated entire Federation fleets. Their unconventional tactics worked where traditional weapons had failed. "Incredible," Sukjin breathed. "You fight like no human I've ever seen." "I am not like other humans," Daeho replied, dodging another attacking creature. "I am Fireborn of the Flameheart clan." The battle continued as they fought their way up the mountain. By the time they reached the crater rim, the immediate threat had passed, but Sukjin's expression remained grave. "This is just the beginning," he warned. "The Shadow Swarm has found this world. They will return in greater numbers." Daeho looked out over the landscape of Piraxis Prime, seeing his adopted home with new eyes. Somewhere down there, Velnara and the rest of his clan were in danger from these terrible creatures. He reached down and picked up a piece of star metal from the crater rim, completing his trial. But as he held the glowing fragment, he realized his real test was just beginning. The universe was much larger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined, and his family needed protection that only he might be able to provide. 3 days after the encounter on Mount Infernus, the Shadow Swarm returned in numbers that blacked out the orange sky of Piraxis Prime. Daeho stood on the highest platform of the Flameheart Caverns, watching the dark shapes pour from the heavens like a plague of metal insects. Beside him, Sukjin worked frantically with his communication device, trying to contact the Galactic Federation fleet he claimed was somewhere in the outer system. "No response," Sukjin said, shaking his head. "Either they are too far away or something is jamming my signals." Below them, the Ignis clans were preparing for war. Torkhan had called together all the nearby clans, and their combined roars echoed through the mountain caverns like controlled thunder. Hundreds of the great fire-breathing warriors gathered, their scales gleaming in the light of glowing crystals. But Daeho could see the worry in their glowing eyes. The Shadow Swarm creatures they had fought on the mountain were just scouts. What was coming now was an army. "Tell me about their queen," Daeho said to Sukjin. "You mentioned something called Voidmaw." Sukjin's face went pale. "She is the leader of this particular swarm fleet. The Federation has encountered her 3 times before. Each time she consumed an entire star system before moving on. Her body is said to be larger than most ships. Where would she make her nest? Somewhere with massive energy sources. The swarm feeds on power, any kind of power." Daeho looked toward the largest volcano in the distance. Mount Infernus was still erupting from their trial 3 days ago, shooting streams of lava high into the air. If he were a creature that fed on energy, that would be exactly where he would want to establish a base. "She is going to make her nest inside the great volcano," Daeho said with certainty. Before Sukjin could respond, the ground shook with tremendous force, but this was not the familiar trembling of volcanic activity. This shaking came in waves as if something impossibly huge was burrowing through the mountain itself. Flamewing came running up to the platform, his scales bright with excitement and fear. "Brother," he called to Daeho, "the elders are calling for you. Velnara wishes to speak with both of us before the battle begins." They found the ancient Ignis matriarch in the deepest chamber of the clan territory. Velnara was very old now, older than when she had first found Daeho 15 years ago. Her scales had turned almost white with age, but her golden eyes still burned with wisdom and strength. Around her sat the other clan elders, their massive forms creating a circle of living mountains. When Daeho entered, they all turned to look at him with expressions he could not read. "Fireborn," Velnara said in her rumbling voice, "the time has come for you to learn the truth of why you came to us." "What truth?" The old matriarch gestured with one massive claw toward ancient carvings on the chamber walls. The symbols were older than any Daeho had seen before, carved by Ignis, who lived thousands of years ago. Long ago, our people received a prophecy from the star speakers. Ignis, who could see glimpses of possible futures. They saw that one day our world would face a darkness that consumed light itself. They also saw that salvation would come in the form of a small flame from the stars, different from our own fire but no less bright. Deho stared at the carvings. One showed what looked like a small figure standing between massive creatures and swirling darkness. "You believe I am this prophesied savior?" "I believe," Velnara said slowly, "that you were brought to us not by accident but by the will of the universe itself. You have learned our strength, Fireborn, but you carry within you the adaptability and hope of your own people. Together, these gifts make you something new." Sukjin stepped forward. "With respect to your beliefs, we need practical solutions. The Federation needs to know how you defeated those swarm scouts. Your techniques could save countless worlds." "The Federation?" rumbled Torkan from across the circle. "What is this Federation to us? We have protected our own world for thousands of years without help from star travelers." "Because you have never faced anything like the Shadow Swarm before," Sukjin replied. "They have destroyed civilizations that lasted for millions of years. No single world can stand against them alone." As if summoned by his words, a tremendous roar echoed through the mountain. It was not the roar of any Ignis, but something darker and hungrier. The sound seemed to come from deep within Mount Infernus itself. "Voidmaw has arrived," Sukjin whispered. The ground shook again, more violently than before. Dust and small rocks fell from the ceiling of the chamber. The golden crystals that provided light flickered as if something was draining their energy. "She is feeding on the volcano," Deho realized. "The more energy she consumes, the stronger she will become." Velnara struggled to her feet, her ancient body moving with difficulty. "Then we must strike before she grows too powerful. Gather the clans, Torkan. We ride to battle." "Wait," Deho said. "If we attack her directly, we will lose. The swarm grows stronger by absorbing our attacks. We need a different strategy." "What do you propose, Fireborn?" asked Torkan. Deho thought quickly, drawing on everything he had learned from both Ignis tactics and human strategic thinking. "We divide our forces. Most of the clans will create a distraction, drawing the swarm creatures away from Mount Infernus. A small group will penetrate the volcano and strike at Voidmaw directly. And who will lead this small group?" "I will, along with Flamewing and anyone brave enough to follow us into the heart of an active volcano to face a creature that devours worlds." Sukjin stepped forward. "I will come with you. My equipment might be useful, and the Federation needs to know what happens here." Several younger Ignis volunteers joined them, warriors who had grown up hearing stories of the human Fireborn and wanted to fight beside him. But as they prepared to leave, Velnara called Deho aside. "There is something else you must know," she said quietly. "The prophecy speaks of a choice the Starflame must make. To save our world, he might have to leave it forever." "What do you mean?" "I do not know exactly. But I fear that to truly defeat this darkness, you will have to carry the fight beyond our world, to places where the fire of Ignis has never burned." Before Deho could ask more questions, alarms began ringing throughout the cavern system. The main swarm force was attacking the outer settlements. "Go, Fireborn," Velnara said. "Do what you were born to do." As Deho ran toward the battle, he felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. He was no longer just a human raised by Ignis, or even just a warrior of the Flameheart clan. He was becoming something that the universe needed, though he did not yet understand what that meant. The tunnels of Mount Infernus waited ahead, along with Voidmaw and the answers to questions he was only beginning to ask. The real battle was about to begin, and with it, Deho's transformation from local hero to something much greater and more dangerous. The battle against Voidmaw had ended in victory, but at a terrible cost. The ancient queen of the Shadow Swarm lay dead in the depths of Mount Infernus, but many Ignis warriors had died fighting her children. Velnara was among the fallen, having given her life to protect a group of young Ignis from a collapsing tunnel. Now Deho stood on the bridge of a Federation starship called the Morning Star, watching Peraxis Prime grow smaller through the viewing window. Flamewing stood beside him, the young Ignis having volunteered to come as an ambassador for his people. "I have never seen the stars from this side before," Flamewing said, his voice filled with wonder. "Neither have I," Deho replied. The inside of a starship was completely different from the warm stone caves he had called home for 15 years. Sukjin approached them from the ship's communication center. Admiral Yoon Seo wants to speak with you before we reach Nexus Station. She is very interested in how you defeated creatures that destroyed 3 Federation battle fleets. Daeho nodded. He still felt strange wearing the Federation uniform they had given him. The synthetic materials were nothing like the simple clothes made from volcanic fibers that the Ignis wore. The Admiral appeared on the main screen, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back in a tight style. She wore more decorations on her uniform than anyone Daeho had ever seen. "So you are the human raised by dragons," Admiral Yoon Seo said, studying Daeho carefully. "Your tactics against the Shadow Swarm have impressed many people in Federation command." "I only did what needed to be done," Daeho replied. "Using environmental weapons against energy-absorbing enemies was brilliant. No one in our tactical schools thought of that approach. The Ignis teach that the strongest warrior is one who fights with everything around him, not just the weapons in his hands." Admiral Yoon Seo smiled. "That is exactly the kind of thinking we need at the Academy. You will find Nexus Station very different from your volcanic world." She was right. When the Morning Star docked at Nexus Station 3 days later, Daeho felt like he had entered a dream. The station was larger than the biggest Ignis city, floating in space like a metal moon. Inside, beings from dozens of different worlds lived and worked together. There were the Luminar, creatures that looked like walking crystals with light glowing from within their bodies. The Hydros moved in special water-filled suits, their tentacles gracefully controlling the machinery. Insect-like Chitani clicked and buzzed as they communicated with each other in rapid patterns. "So many different people," Flamewing observed as they walked through the station's main corridor. Several other beings stopped to stare at the massive fire-breathing Ignis, but most seemed used to seeing strange creatures from other worlds. Their first stop was the Academy's administrative center, where they met Commander Tae-young. He was a human in his 30s with perfectly neat hair and a uniform without a single wrinkle. His eyes were cold as he looked at Daeho's file. No formal education, no previous military training. Raised by primitive aliens on a backwater planet, Commander Tae-young read aloud. "I am not sure why Admiral Yoon Seo thinks you belong at the Academy. Perhaps because he defeated enemies that you could not," Flamewing rumbled, small flames flickering around his teeth. Commander Tae-young's face turned red, but before he could respond, another voice interrupted. "I would like to see how the primitive alien-raised human performs before making any judgments." The speaker was Lieutenant Boram, a young woman with intelligent eyes and captain's rank insignia. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had earned her position through skill rather than politics. "Lieutenant Boram is one of our top tactical instructors," Commander Tae-young said stiffly. "If you wish to waste your time testing this person, that is your choice," Boram smiled. "I never consider learning a waste of time. Come, Daeho, let us see what dragon training looks like." The Academy's training center was unlike anything Daeho had ever seen. Instead of simple stone fighting circles, there were holographic environments that could simulate any kind of battlefield. Students from dozens of species practiced combat techniques, some using advanced weapons and others relying on natural abilities. "We will start with a basic combat simulation," Boram explained. "You will face 3 opponents in a standard urban environment. Most students take several attempts to complete this exercise successfully." Daeho nodded and stepped into the holographic chamber. Immediately, the empty room transformed into a city street with buildings, vehicles, and civilians walking around. 3 armed opponents materialized at different positions around the area. But something felt wrong to Daeho. The simulation was too clean, too predictable. Real battles were messy and chaotic, full of unexpected elements. He closed his eyes and tried to feel the environment the way Velnara had taught him. When the exercise began, Daeho did not attack his opponents directly. Instead, he began moving through the simulated city like water flowing around obstacles. He used the environment itself as a weapon, just as he had learned fighting the Shadow Swarm. He caused a simulated vehicle to crash into one opponent. He led another into a building and brought down part of the ceiling. The third enemy he defeated by using the crowd of virtual civilians as cover, approaching unseen until he could strike. The entire exercise took less than 2 minutes. "Remarkable," Boram breathed as the simulation ended. "I have never seen anyone use the environment so creatively." Word of Daeho's performance spread quickly through the academy. Soon students and instructors were coming to watch him train. His methods were completely different from standard Federation tactics. Where other students learned to use technology and advanced weapons, Taeho relied on reading his opponents and using whatever was available around him. Where they planned complex strategies, he adapted to changing situations. With the fluid flexibility of water or fire, he fights like no human I have ever seen, one instructor told another after watching Taeho spar with a group of Chitani warriors. He is not like other humans, Flamewing replied proudly. He is fireborn, raised by the wisest teachers in the galaxy. But Taeho faced challenges beyond combat training. Federation technology confused him, and the complex politics of dealing with dozens of different species was completely new. During one diplomatic exercise, he accidentally insulted a Luminar delegate by suggesting they were not bright enough, not understanding that their people's light changed color based on their emotions. His roommate, a quiet pilot named Namho, helped him understand some of the social customs. Namho was skilled with ships and navigation but nervous in combat situations. The trick, Namho explained one evening, is to remember that every species has different ways of showing respect. What seems normal to one person might be offensive to another. How do you keep track of it all? Taeho asked. Practice. Lots of practice. Just like learning to fly a starship. As weeks passed, Taeho began to understand that his Ignis upbringing had given him something unique. The Flameheart clan had taught him to see strength in others rather than fearing differences. This made him a natural leader, able to work with beings that other humans found difficult to understand. His first real test came during a major academy exercise. Students were divided into mixed species teams and asked to solve a complex problem that required both combat skills and diplomatic cooperation. Taeho found himself leading a team that included Boram, Namho, 2 Chitani scouts, a Luminar engineer, and a Hydros communications specialist. Commander Tae-young was in charge of the opposing team, and he clearly wanted to prove that traditional Federation training was superior to Taeho's unconventional methods. The exercise scenario was a rescue mission. A Federation research station was under attack by unknown enemies, and both teams had to work together to save the researchers and defend the facility. But Commander Tae-young refused to coordinate with Taeho's team. He insisted on using standard military procedures and would not listen to alternative suggestions. Taeho realized that the exercise was designed to test more than just combat skills. It was about learning to work together even when cooperation was difficult. Drawing on lessons learned during clan meetings on Peraxis Prime, Taeho began working around Commander Tae-young's stubbornness. He used the Chitani scouts to gather information, the Luminar engineer to solve technical problems, and the Hydros specialist to maintain communication between all the different groups. When the simulated attack came, Taeho's team was ready. They had prepared multiple backup plans and coordinated their different abilities into a unified defense. Commander Tae-young's team, relying only on standard tactics, was quickly overwhelmed by the complex scenario. Exceptional work, Admiral Yoon Seo said when the exercise ended. You turned a group of individuals into a real team. I learned that from watching the Ignis clans work together, Taeho replied. Even when they disagree, they find ways to combine their strengths. As his time at the academy continued, Taeho began to understand that his real education was just beginning. He was learning not just how to fight, but how to bring together the best qualities of many different peoples. The skills he had learned on Peraxis Prime were the foundation, but the universe was teaching him to build something much larger on that foundation. Captain Taeho stood on the bridge of his ship, the Peraxis Dawn, watching the blue-white surface of Crystallis grow larger on the main screen. The homeworld of the Luminar people should have been shining like a star, its crystalline cities casting rainbow light across the planet's surface. Instead, it looked dim and gray, as if someone had drained the color from an entire world. Shadow swarm infection confirmed, reported Lieutenant Boram from the tactical station. The planet's energy readings are 50% below normal levels. How long do you estimate the people have been affected? Taeho asked. Based on the rate of energy drain, probably 3 weeks, replied Ensign Namho from the pilot's position. Maybe less. Flamewing moved closer to the main screen, his massive form casting shadows across the bridge. The young Ignis had adapted well to serving on a Federation starship, though the corridors had needed to be expanded to accommodate his size. I do not understand, Flamewing said. How can creatures that feed on energy attack the mind instead? They evolved, Deho replied grimly. The Shadow Swarm learned from our victory on Peraxis Prime. If they cannot absorb our fire directly, they will put out the fire in our hearts. Dr. Hyjin looked up from her research station. The xenopsychologist had joined Deho's crew specifically to study Shadow Swarm mental attacks. The infection appears to work by amplifying fear and self-doubt. The victims begin to believe they are weak and helpless. Their natural abilities start to fade because they lose faith in themselves. Like poison, but for the spirit instead of the body. Flamewing observed. Exactly. And once a population loses hope, they become easy prey for the physical swarm creatures. Deho studied the tactical displays showing Shadow Swarm ships in orbit around Crystalis. There were fewer than expected for a full invasion force. This was something new. A psychological attack that did most of the work before the main force arrived. Take us into orbit, he ordered. But keep the ship ready for quick escape. We need to understand what we are facing before we commit to battle. The Peraxis Dawn was not like other Federation ships. Deho had requested crew members from many different species, believing that diversity made them stronger. Besides his human and Ignis core team, the ship carried Chitani scouts, Luminar engineers, Hydros communication specialists, and others. More importantly, every crew member had volunteered to serve under Deho specifically. Word of the human raised by dragons had spread throughout the Federation military, and many beings wanted to learn his unconventional fighting methods. As they entered orbit, messages began coming from the planet's surface. The transmissions were heartbreaking. Luminar leaders spoke in dull, lifeless voices about surrender and defeat. Citizens reported that their crystalline bodies were cracking and growing dim. It is like watching a people die from the inside out, Boram said quietly. Not if I can help it, Deho replied. He activated the ship's communication system to address his crew. All hands, this is the captain. We are facing a new kind of enemy, one that attacks the mind and spirit, but we have something the Shadow Swarm does not understand. We have learned to find strength in each other. He paused, thinking of lessons learned long ago in the Flameheart Caverns. The Ignis taught me that true fire cannot be extinguished by outside forces. It can only die if we let it. Today, we will teach the Luminar people to rekindle their inner light. The plan that Deho developed was unlike anything in Federation tactical manuals. Instead of attacking the Shadow Swarm ships directly, the Peraxis Dawn would land in the capital city of Crystalis and work to restore the people's hope and confidence. You want to do therapy for an entire planet? Dr. Hyjin asked when he explained the strategy. I want to remind them who they are, Deho corrected. Fear makes us forget our own strength. Hope helps us remember it. They landed in the main plaza of the Luminar capital, a city that should have been filled with singing crystal spires and dancing lights. Instead, the buildings stood silent and gray, their surfaces cracked and dull. Luminar citizens moved through the streets like sleepwalkers, their bodies growing more transparent as their inner light faded. Some were so affected that they were barely visible, like ghosts haunting their own city. Deho led a team into the city center, where the Luminar Council was holding what appeared to be a surrender ceremony. The council members sat in a circle, their crystalline forms so dim they looked like cloudy glass. Citizens of Crystalis, the council speaker said in a voice like breaking glass, we have decided to surrender to the Shadow Swarm. Resistance is hopeless. We are too weak to fight, no, Deho said, stepping into the circle. You are not weak. You have forgotten your strength. The council speaker looked at him with eyes that barely glowed. You are the human they call Fireborn, but even you cannot fight against the darkness in our minds. Watch me. Deho began to speak, but not in the way that humans usually communicated. He used techniques learned from years of living with the Ignis, combining words with body language and emotional projection in patterns that reach deeper than normal speech. He told them about Vel Nara, the ancient Ignis who had found strength to care for a lost child even when it seemed impossible. He spoke of Flamewing, who had left his homeworld to explore the universe despite his fears. He described Boram, Namho, and all the others who had chosen courage over safety. But most importantly, he reminded the Luminar of their own history. He spoke of the great crystal cities they had built, the beautiful art they had created, the scientific discoveries that had helped the entire Federation. The Shadow Swarm wants you to believe you are nothing, Deho said, but I have seen what you can accomplish. Your people built starships from living crystal. You created music that can heal broken hearts. You are not weak. You are wonderful. Slowly, very slowly, a few luminar began to glow a little brighter. The effect spread like fire catching dry wood, moving from person to person as they remembered their pride and accomplishments. The council speaker's eyes began to shine again. But the shadow swarm ships in orbit are fewer than they seem, Deho replied. They rely on fear to make themselves appear stronger. When you stop being afraid, you will see them as they really are. As hope returned to the Luminar people, something amazing happened. Their crystalline bodies began to sing, creating harmonious tones that grew stronger as more voices joined in. The sound rose from the city and echoed across the planet. Above them, the shadow swarm ship suddenly seemed smaller and less threatening. Dr. Hai-Jin was right. Fear had made the enemy appear more powerful than they actually were. Now, Deho said to Flamewing, now we fight. The battle that followed was unlike any previous shadow swarm encounter. The Luminar people, their confidence restored, discovered that their natural crystalline abilities could actually disrupt swarm technology. Their bodies could create frequency patterns that confused the creature's navigation systems. Working together, the Piraxis Dawn and the Luminar Defense Forces drove off the shadow swarm ships in less than 2 hours. More importantly, they proved that the psychological attacks could be defeated with the right approach. News of the victory at Crystallis spread quickly through Federation space. Other worlds that had fallen to similar psychological attacks began requesting Deho's help. Over the following months, the Piraxis Dawn traveled from system to system, helping different species rediscover their inner strength. Each victory taught Deho more about the true nature of courage and leadership. But even as they won battle after battle, disturbing reports came from Federation intelligence. The Shadow Swarm was changing its tactics again, becoming more dangerous with each encounter. They are learning from us faster than we are learning from them, Admiral Yoon Seo warned during one secure communication. Our analysts believe there is some kind of central intelligence coordinating all swarm activities. What kind of intelligence? Deho asked. Something ancient and vast, something that has been consuming galaxies for millions of years. They call it the eternal hunger. As Deho heard those words, he felt a chill despite the warmth of his ship's life support systems. The battles they had been fighting were just the beginning. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, something unimaginably old and dangerous was watching their progress with growing interest. The real war was about to begin, and Deho was starting to understand that defeating the eternal hunger would require more than just military tactics or psychological warfare. It would require something that no one had ever attempted before. The thought both terrified and excited him. The teachings of the Ignis had prepared him for many things, but this challenge would test everything he had learned about courage, leadership, and the power of hope in the face of impossible odds. The final battle began not with explosions or battle cries, but with silence. The eternal hunger had revealed itself at last, and its presence seemed to drain sound and light from the very fabric of space. Deho stood on the bridge of the Piraxis Dawn, staring at something that should not have been possible to see. The eternal hunger was not a ship or even a creature in any normal sense. It was a vast darkness shaped roughly like a massive flower, its petals made of twisted metal and organic matter that had once been entire civilizations. Energy readings are off all our charts, reported Boram, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. That thing is larger than some moons. Around them, the largest fleet in Federation history hung in space like tiny insects facing a storm. Ships from dozens of species had answered Deho's call for a united assault. Ignis fire ships glowed like small suns. Luminar vessels sang their crystal harmonies. Chitani swarm fighters moved in precise geometric patterns. Admiral Yoon Seo's voice came through the communication system from her flagship. All fleet commanders, this is Admiral Yoon Seo. Today we face an enemy that has devoured galaxies for millions of years. But we do not fight alone, and we do not fight without hope. Captain Deho will coordinate our assault. Deho activated his own fleet-wide communication channel. In the years since leaving Piraxis Prime, he had learned to speak in ways that inspired beings from many different worlds. Warriors of the Federation, friends from across the galaxy. Today we face the darkness that has haunted space since before any of our civilizations began. The eternal hunger believes that destruction is the only truth in the universe. We are here to show it something different. He paused, thinking of Velnara and all the Ignis who had died defending their world from the first Shadow Swarm attack. We are here to show it that life creates more life, that hope grows stronger when shared, and that even the oldest darkness can be transformed by those brave enough to carry light. The fleet began its approach. Deho's strategy was complex, using the different abilities of each species in coordinated waves. The Chitani scouts would map the Eternal Hunger's defenses. The Luminar ships would disrupt its energy absorption systems. The Ignis fire ships would provide raw destructive power when needed. But as they drew closer, something unexpected happened. The Eternal Hunger did not attack them with weapons or Shadow Swarm creatures. Instead, it reached out with something far more dangerous. It attacked their minds. Suddenly, every person in the fleet was flooded with visions of despair and defeat. They saw their homeworlds burning, their families dying, their civilizations crumbling to dust. The Eternal Hunger showed them images of every race it had consumed over the millennia, whispering that resistance was hopeless because everything always ended in death and emptiness. One by one, ships began to slow and stop as their crews were overwhelmed by cosmic despair. Even the bravest warriors found themselves paralyzed by the weight of universal suffering that the Eternal Hunger had absorbed during its endless existence. On the bridge of the Piraxis Dawn, Namho slumped over his control panel, tears streaming down his face. "What is the point?" he whispered. "Everything we do just delays the inevitable. Everything dies eventually." Boram stared at her tactical displays with empty eyes. "All our victories were meaningless. The hunger will consume everything anyway." Even Flamewing, the proud Ignis warrior, seemed to shrink as his scales grew dim. "The fire dies," he said in a voice like ashes. "All fire dies." But Deho did not fall to despair because the Eternal Hunger had made a crucial mistake. It showed him all the suffering and death it had witnessed. But Deho had been raised by beings who understood that pain and joy were both part of life's fire. The Ignis had taught him that true strength came not from avoiding suffering, but from accepting it as part of existence while still choosing to hope and love and fight. Velnara had shown him that even in the face of death, life could create something beautiful and lasting. Instead of being crushed by the Eternal Hunger's accumulated despair, Deho felt something different. He felt compassion for this ancient being that had existed alone in the darkness for so long that it had forgotten any possibility except emptiness. "I understand your pain," Deho said, speaking not to his crew but to the vast intelligence that filled the space around them. "You have been alone for so long that you believe loneliness is the only truth. You have seen so much death that you think death is all there is." The Eternal Hunger paused in its mental assault, surprised that anyone could respond to its despair with understanding rather than terror. Deho continued, using every technique he had learned for reaching across the barriers between different kinds of consciousness. "But you are wrong. Death is not the end of the story. It is part of a larger cycle that includes birth and growth and love and hope." He began to project his own memories outward, not just to the Eternal Hunger, but to every mind in the fleet. He showed them Velnara finding him as a lost child and choosing to love him despite their differences. He shared the memory of Flamewing sacrificing safety to explore the universe. He projected images of Boram's brilliant strategies, Namho's quiet courage, Dr. Hyjin's dedication to understanding other minds. Most importantly, he showed the Eternal Hunger something it had never experienced. The moment when beings chose to work together despite their differences, creating something greater than any individual could achieve alone. "You do not have to be alone anymore," Deho said. "You do not have to consume everything you encounter. You could choose to help things grow instead of destroying them. You could choose connection over isolation." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The Eternal Hunger's accumulated anguish poured into Deho's mind like a flood of liquid night. Millions of years of loneliness and suffering crashed down on him all at once. But Deho had been prepared for this by a lifetime of Ignis training. He did not try to fight the pain or push it away. Instead, he accepted it completely, letting it flow through him while maintaining his core of hope and compassion. The technique was something Velnara had taught him during his earliest days with the Ignis. "Fire does not fight the wind," she had said. "Fire dances with it and becomes stronger." For long moments that felt like years, Deho absorbed the Eternal Hunger's pain while projecting back his own experiences of joy, friendship, and hope. Slowly, incredibly, the ancient intelligence began to change. The darkness that had consumed galaxies started to shift and transform. Where there had been only emptiness and hunger, new patterns began to emerge. The eternal hunger discovered that it could create as well as destroy, that it could nurture growth instead of consuming everything it touched. The shadow swarm creatures throughout the galaxy stopped their attacks and began working to repair the damage they had caused. Worlds that had been stripped of life started to bloom again as the transformed intelligence used its vast power to restore, rather than destroy. Throughout the fleet, minds that had been crushed by despair suddenly filled with wonder and hope. The crews of hundreds of ships watched in amazement as the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known chose transformation over destruction. Impossible, whispered Admiral Yunseo over the communication channel. In all our scenarios, we never imagined this outcome. The impossible becomes possible when we refuse to accept that things cannot change, Deho replied. But the effort had taken its toll on him. Absorbing and transforming millions of years of cosmic suffering had pushed his human mind to its absolute limits. He collapsed on the bridge of the Paraxis Dawn, his consciousness scattered across space and time. When he finally awakened, he was back on Paraxis Prime, lying in the same chamber where Velnara had first brought him as a child. Flamewing was sitting nearby, his scales glowing with relief. "Welcome back, brother," the Ignis said. "You have been sleeping for many days. Did it work?" Deho asked weakly. "Is the eternal hunger truly changed?" "See for yourself." Flamewing helped him to the chamber entrance where they could look out over the volcanic landscape. But the view was different than Deho remembered. New plants were growing in places where nothing had lived before. The lava flows had formed new patterns that seemed almost artistic. Even the air felt cleaner and more alive. The transformed intelligence asked to be called something new, Flamewing explained. It chose the name Eternal Growth, and has begun working to restore life to all the worlds it once consumed. Over the following months, Deho learned the full scope of what had happened. The galaxy had entered a new age of cooperation and growth. Species that had never communicated before were sharing knowledge and resources. Technologies that had seemed impossible were becoming reality through combined effort. Most importantly, the victory had proven that even the oldest and most entrenched patterns could be changed through understanding and compassion, rather than violence. Deho established the Academy of Unity on Pyraxis Prime, where young beings from all species could learn not just combat techniques and strategies, but the deeper wisdom of finding strength through cooperation and understanding. On the day of the Academy's official opening, students from dozens of worlds gathered in the great cavern that had once housed only the Flameheart clan. Ignis youngsters trained alongside Luminar children, Tritani scouts, Hydros philosophers, and many others. Flamewing found Deho standing on a high ledge, watching the mixed groups of students as they learned from each other. "What do you see when you look at them?" Flamewing asked. Deho smiled, remembering a conversation with Velnara from long ago. "I see the future. I see beings who will never think that differences make them enemies because they grew up knowing that differences make them stronger." "And what do you see for yourself, Fireborn?" Deho considered the question. He had been called many things over the years. The human raised by dragons, the Fireborn warrior, the greatest hero of the galaxy. But as he watched young beings from across the universe learning to work together, he realized that his greatest accomplishment was not any single victory in battle. His greatest accomplishment was proving that understanding could triumph over fear, that cooperation could overcome isolation, and that even the darkest corners of the universe could be filled with light when beings chose hope over despair. "I see a teacher," he said finally, "someone who learned from the wisest beings in the galaxy, and now gets to pass that wisdom on to those who will carry it to the stars." As the sun set over the volcanic peaks of Paraxis Prime, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded him of Ignis fire, Deho realized that his story was not ending. It was just beginning a new chapter. The universe was vast and full of challenges that would require the combined wisdom and strength of all its peoples. But for the first time in cosmic history, those peoples had learned to work together instead of fighting alone. And at the center of it all, in a great cavern filled with the laughter and voices of young beings from 100 different worlds, the lessons of the Flameheart clan continued to burn bright, proving that the strongest fire was not one that burned alone, but one that lit the way for others to follow. The human raised by fire-breathing beasts had become something greater than a hero. He had become a bridge between worlds, showing the galaxy that its greatest strength lay not in any single species or individual, but in the magnificent diversity of life itself. The story of Deho, the Fireborn, had ended. The story of the united galaxy he helped create was just beginning.